Let's talk about the concept of repeated exposure in terms of programming for powerlifting. So, the idea of repeated exposure is doing the same sets, reps, weight, and exercises multiple times within the same training block. So, you're not increasing the weight that you're using, you're not increasing the number of sets, you're not increasing the number of reps. You're literally doing the same thing multiple times in different training sessions. And this kind of flies in the face of something I've talked about before, which is the concept of the repeated bout effect, which means that each time you do the same sets, reps, and loading for a given exercise, it gets a little bit less effective. And I think sometimes people get caught up in the idea that you have to do more every single time that you train to induce progressive overload. That is kind of the driving concept of getting stronger, is that you have to do more than you've done before to continue to adapt and get bigger and stronger. But it doesn't mean that if you do the same thing multiple times in the same training block that it's 0% effective. I think that chasing progressive overload at all costs can sometimes get people in trouble. It can sometimes lead to plateaus sooner rather than later, especially if you've been training for an extended period of time. If you're somebody who's newer to strength training, if you're a newbie, you can probably add weight to the bar every single training session for each exercise kind of indefinitely. And once that starts to slow down, then you got to get a little bit more strategic. And that's where the idea of using repeated exposure can be really beneficial. And there are a lot of really successful, well-known training programs that use the idea of repeated exposure. Probably the most well-known one is the Boris Shiko programs, those kind of old school Russian high volume, low intensity programs where it's highly specific. You're doing a lot of the competition lifts each week. You're usually squatting and deadlifting at least twice a week and then benching 3 to 4 times a week. So it's a lot of exposure to the main lifts. And a lot of the set and rep schemes are very, very similar within the same training week. And then again, week over week until the given block has kind of run its course. And the way I like to think of it is that the first time that you do a given set, rep, and loading scheme for a certain exercise, maybe it's 100% effective. Maybe you get the most possible stimulus out of that protocol. And the next time you do it, it doesn't go from 100% effectiveness to 0% effectiveness. It's not like if I squat 405 for 5 sets of 3 on day 1 of a given program, and then the next week I do the same exact thing. It's not like I get absolutely nothing out of it. In fact, I still probably get a lot out of it. Maybe it goes from 100% effective to maybe 90% effective. And then if I go and do it a third time, maybe it goes from 90% effective to 80% effective. You get the idea. And those numbers are not scientific by any means, but I think it's just kind of common sense that if you do the same thing over and over and over, eventually it'll get unproductive, but it's not non-productive if you do the same thing over and over. And this idea of using repeated exposure is a really good way to dial in technique, to make a weight that used to be heavy feel easy. That's a beneficial way to train. I think it's a really good way to make sure that you feel in a groove, that your technique feels dialed in. And there are going to be other ways that you can induce progressive overload over the course of a program like that, but you can't ride on that forever. So get it out of your head that you have to set some sort of PR every single time that you train, because the longer you train, the less likely that's going to be that that's actually going to happen. So it's okay to do the same thing over and over and over. You will get some benefit out of it, but just know at some point you've got to put more weight on the bar. You've got to increase the volume. You got to change the exercises. You got to induce progressive overload somehow, some way.